Written blessing for the candles of the solstice. Maybe later we'll talk a little bit about solstice in Jewish tradition. It's called Tekufah, the changing of the guard, kind of, the shuffling of the seasons. And the teaching, the mystical teaching, is that God changes the bands of angels who protect the world at the solstice. And so they say that because of that, the negative elements are trying to get in. And so the Zohar says that one needs to be careful the day or two before the solstice, that there's a buildup of energy because of the shift that's going to take place. And if you ever go to Israel or go to Israel again, there's a wonderful tile floor in the synagogue in Tiberias in which the tekufot, the solstices and the equinoxes, are marked by beautiful figures. They're very androgynous. I think they're meant to be feminine figures. They're based more on Roman thinking. And those are the markers for the different tekufot. Please come in. Welcome. So, according to stuff that I have read, they say that in the synagogue, up until about the 11th century, that they used to actually announce the solstice and the equinox, and that there were special prayers. Up until the time of Saadia Gaon, who was a great teacher, the 10th century, and I have to watch out for the microphone, and I've never been able to find those prayers. They were supposed to be in a 19th century or an 18th century prayer book, and I've tried finding them and never found them. So at some point, some rabbinical student will undoubtedly find them. And if anybody is interested, I actually have put together the materials from the Zohar on the solstice and the equinox. And
the Gaonim were great squashers.
What does that mean?
Of alternative modalities. That the Talmud gave us a broad view, and the Gaonim, through successive generations, brought things into a normative
to narrower
practice.
view,
and so
more
lots
into
of things
practice.
went away.
Yeah. So, welcome everybody. And tonight we're going to be very much gifted by the beautiful, beautiful voice of our friend Sophia. Elisa was here last week, so we've been very blessed. And I'm also very blessed that they are my musician friends who have, in general, given me permission to use their music. And especially when they're here, it means that they will be part of the video. So that's like a double or a triple blessing, at least.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah. And Katie, come on in and sit down.
I just thought I would leap over to another culture completely here and do a little chant to Lakshmi, goddess of abundance. We love, she's our friend. Om Shri Mahalakshmi Namah. 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 Lakshmi Namah. Lakshmi Namah. I'd just like to share with you a special amped up version of this chant. We're really getting stuff to happen, and I was doing this just before this very nice man gave me that beautiful Lexus out there, so I have to say that it goes like this. Om Shreem 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. Try it. Om Shreem 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. I'm reaching up. Om Shreem 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. Om Shreem 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. And even more for drawing things to it is Om Clean 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. Om Clean 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 Mahalakshmi Namah. Om Clean 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 Mahalakshmi Namah.
Just to show you how effective her prayers are. So, years later.
Om Shreem Shreem Shreem
Mahalakshmi Namaha.
Om Clean 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 Mahalakshmi Namaha. So it is. Freshly minted.
Freshly minted. You know, there is a tradition, a Hasidic tradition, of the Rebbe giving money. When you went to get a blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he often gave out, as I recall, dollar bills. Sometimes I give out $50, if I can get shiny ones, to commemorate that notion of everybody giving a half shekel for the construction of the sacred space in the desert. And sometimes I give them out, but with a little, twinge, which is take this coin, multiply at least 10 times and give it to charity. But tonight, being a time of abundance and beautiful growth, you can do whatever you want with it. Last week we were in the Rose Garden for a meditation, so we were getting that sense of the beauty and the fragrance and the abundance of this season that was enlivening our insights into the Kabbalah of love, and the week before that, the Kabbalah of food. And in a way, this sequence is really related because it's all about sustenance and nurturance, and where does it come from? So the obvious thing in both the Kabbalah and probably every other tradition is that everything is from God. Everything is from God. You might want to take that seat. I think you won't be. Oh, is there somebody there? Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. Just trying to deal with a little bit with the appearance of the room. Excuse me. So the teaching is that everything's from God. And in the morning we say, Poteach et yadecha, to God opens the great hand, umasbia lechol chai ratzon, and nourishes all of the creatures on the planet. There's another interpretation of this, that it's about opening that yud in the yud hey vav hey, that upper yud that connects to the highest level of the source is opened up, and that there is not just an overflow of abundance, but an everflow. Remember, we were studying the chart, the idea that in the supernal mother Bina is this well of everything that keeps flowing down into all the planets and then all the creatures. So essentially we're saying everything is from God. Everything on earth is nourished by God. And theoretically, if we look at it that way, and I was thinking of how to compare the Zohar to kind of New Age thought and New Thought in religious science, theoretically there is an endless supply. It is for everything on earth. So theoretically we ought to be able to tap into it. The question is how? So I took some of the material for explaining the how from a book called Sharei Ora, The Gates of Light, by a very famous sage Kabbalist teacher named Joseph Gikatilla, also I think 13th century. He's about on the same time as the author of the Zohar. And he says that the key is how to take our prayer from the depths, from the deepest, lowest, not lowest, bad low, but the deepest level of self up to the highest level. Because he's saying it is God on high who's raining down all these showers of abundance like the manna when we were in the desert. So he says, how do we go up the middle pillar? Oh my God. The middle pillar fell down. No wonder we don't have money.
It's going to the deepest.
It's going to the deepest depths right now.
And the rising.
How is it? How was it?
It was just behind the door, open the door up, and it just kind of, there you go.
Yeah, we did tax last week, which is a no-no in this room. I guess next week we'll do tape. That's very good. So this is the four-letter name of God, the Tetragrammaton, the Yud, He, Vav, He. And so he says we need to start with the lower He, which is the Shekhinah in Malchut, the level of the earth, the level of Gaia, in our body, the level of the feet. To bring the prayer up, the middle pillar means it's going up through Yesod, through the foundation, but into the heart, into Tiferet. Remember last week we talked about Tiferet as the young masculine energy, like Jacob, Tammuz, Tamuzi, Adonis. So it would be like we're bringing that energy up the Vav in the Tetragrammaton and reaching the He, which would be Mother Bina that takes care of it all, but ultimately going up into the Yud and into the crown and into the Ein Sof, the beyond time, space, shape, form, genderless divine, where the name of God is Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, which usually is translated as I will be what I will be. Most people who translate Hebrew think of it as the evolving divine, the divine that is always becoming, always evolving, always moving. And so he says we have to bring the prayer up the middle pillar in the tree, and as it relates to our body, bring it to the highest level of the divine source. And for our prayer to ascend there, he says that is the place of ratzon, of which you might translate as desire. It is the place of Eit Ratzon, the time of desire, but it's almost like it is the storehouse of that capacity for taking care of our desire. It's called Makom HaRatzon, the place of desire or the source of the desire. And it is as if what we're doing when we send the prayer up in that fashion is that we are connecting our energy with the divine will. And so when you're doing, this morning when I had Torah out and I was doing Mishaberach for all the people in my life who right now are ill and need energy, welcome. What we're hoping for is when we do the Mishaberach, that our prayer is indeed ascending, and that just as we petition, that there is an answer. Now in Jewish tradition, it is okay during the week to petition, and it is okay on the new moon to petition. Remember last week, we didn't get to see the moon, but on the time of the new moon, you can ask for money and honor and children and a life without any pain and all kinds of honorable ways of making a living. Shabbat is the one time we don't ask, because the understanding is that on Shabbat we are already in the energy of perfection, so we don't ask. We assume for those 26 hours that everything is fine, and we take a moratorium from discussing the world and criticizing things and just try to be with everything as it is. So, if theoretically it is really that simple, a formula, that there is everything and God provides for everything. The Torah says, God says to us, the whole earth is mine. Essentially, we're all visitors, tourists here. Everything belongs to the divine, so it's up to us to send our requests. And Gikatilla says it is perfect prayer. He doesn't specify, although he suggests it should be in Hebrew, but he doesn't specify what is that perfect prayer. He doesn't give us a vocabulary for it or a word formula. He gives us an outline, a diagram of how our energy has to ascend. So, go back then to the question that philosophers and sages and very ordinary people too have been asking for centuries. Why is there wealth and poverty? Why is there unequal distribution of goods? Why is there brilliance and people lacking intelligence? Why are there people who are sick and those who are healthy, etc.? But essentially, the issue of wealth and poverty is a perennial one. And I think it's asked in all cultures. Why should this be? So the Zohar gives us a number of potential reasons. It's kind of a list. I think you can do multiple choice on it. The first thing it says is a reiteration of the Talmud. It says that there are certain things that are not a function of merit, zechut. They were a function of mazal, your luck, particularly mazal b'kochavim, your astrology. So what are the three things it says are not a function of merit? One is children, the nature of your children, whether you have them or not, but what kind of children they are. So Laura's shaking her head. She's wonderful. She has great children. One has an anniversary today. They're all extraordinary. But it's, in a way, it's what you do, but it's also the luck of the draw. The other is sustenance, how you make a living. And I have to look at my notes to see what the third one is. I've sometimes added a fourth myself. But it says, it's not a function of your birth status, your intelligence, your education, or what your parents accomplished. But in essence, there are certain things that are destiny, or what's called in Hebrew, goral, fate. And what is the third thing? Jeff, do you remember? It'll come back to me.
I absolutely have no idea.
Okay. Children, livelihood. The one I use at weddings is weather, W-E-A-T-H-R, but there is one other. Okay, we'll come back to it. Okay, so around the astrological sign, what they say is what the Hindu mother says, which is that with enough prayer, meditation, good works, and charity, you can alter your negative influences in your astrological chart. And if you read Orthodox Jewish astrologers, and yes, there are such, they say the same thing. One of the Orthodox Jewish astrologers whose books I do recommend is a man called Glazerson. He's totally xenophobic, but he's brilliant about the astrology and how it relates to Jewish customs and holidays and so on. Lives in Israel. I think he's South African background. At any rate, so the Zohar is saying the same thing, and we say it Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that those three things, that charity, good works, and prayer, can always rescind, no matter how harsh, in the Rosh Hashanah language, we say no matter how harsh the judgment was about you, it can always be redone. So the Zohar is saying you can kind of retool your astrological chart a little bit. However, it adds something else, and this I found quite intriguing. It says that the status of the Shekhinah, the condition of the divine presence, the Gaia, at the time that you're born will have an influence on you. And they're not just talking about the astrological influence in the personal sense. What they are talking about is that there is a Weltanschauung, there's a milieu to the time that you're born in. Let's say if you were born at the time of the Second World War or the Depression or whatever, and that there are certain issues of that time that perhaps did not get resolved. And that the souls who come in at that time then have an opportunity to take those challenges on and redeem them. So in a way, it's like every soul becomes like a bodhisattva soul, because it says that tzaddikim, the very righteous, they come even though they don't necessarily want to incarnate. They come specifically to help the planet and to help the people. But this is saying that whole generations have also got some of these options. It's not clear, does God ask the soul before it's born, or is it a contract of sorts? But it is suggesting that there will be influences on people that are subtle and beyond their astrology chart. And I think of a friend of mine
who was born while her mother was hiding in a closet in Paris as the Germans were coming in. And her name is Monique Pasternak. And I remember distinctly her saying, I didn't want to be a Holocaust poet. And yet, invariably, she has been called to write about the war and about a lot of other things because perhaps she fits that model. Perhaps there is something in that time that her soul is still resonating with or has agreed to help to do the tikkun for. So that's another possibility. The third possibility is that you have some sort of past life accumulation that you are making up for. And remember we talked about this, we talked about the journey of the soul, those of you who are with me, that each lifetime makes a kind of impression on the soul. In Aramaic it's called Reshimo, Hebrew Reshem, and it's almost like there's this subtle leftover imprint. So one possibility is that you are, in effect, carrying or making up or remedying something that was part of a previous life. I actually watched a DVD in which we talked about reincarnation, and you talked about Second World War memories,
Right.
Cecily Lane. Remember that?
Well, I remember
Right.
that happened, yeah.
Right. So
And
that's another.
not such a subtle effect.
Right. In your case, a serious impact. But it may very well be that the people who go through a Holocaust, a war, a tsunami, a depression, have a certain influence, and then not every soul from that time has been willing to carry it. The last piece is a more direct piece, and you see it in Hasidic literature, and that is where there's a real one-on-one kind of rebalancing. You were rich in one life, you didn't help the poor, you've come back poor this time, you're going to end up having to go to your friend and ask for charity, etc. And Reb Zalman in his book on Hasidic counseling has a very famous story like that, where somebody comes to the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, I have no problems, but I kind of had this dream. And he's a very wealthy man. He says, I had a dream about a poor man coming to me and asking for money. And as he talks to the Rebbe about his dream, he starts to get it, that he was with his friend in a previous life. They made a pact they would always help each other. And the friend was poor and came to him, and he refused to help him. Then he died, and he was poor, and he went to the friend, and the friend helped him. And then the third time around, the friend came to him, and he didn't help him. And so the Baal Shem Tov, at the end, when the guy gets it, the Baal Shem Tov then sends this man to give 75% of his property to the widow of the man he didn't help. So sometimes in Hasidic circles, you'll hear a story that's like a really one-on-one kind of rectification, that you're coming back to resolve it. Now, the other piece that you sometimes get in the Kabbalistic literature is the idea that the rich have it in this life, but they're not going to have it in the world to come. And that the poor are really, in that respect, beloved of God, so to speak. And this comes from the idea that's very old, that the prayers of the poor have a better likelihood of ascending, not because they're poor, but that if you're suffering and you're downtrodden and you don't have enough, chances are that you cry when you pray. And so our sages believed that after the destruction of the temple, all the gates of prayer were closed except the gate of tears. This is a teaching from a sage named Ima Shalom, the mother of peace, who was daughter of a famous sage, married to a famous sage. So there's this idea, it goes back to King David, where even though King David is very wealthy, in the Psalms he'll often refer to himself, I'm poor or lowly. The idea is that hopefully God listens to the prayer that comes from the heart, and also the one that comes from anguish and with a state of tears. So those are kind of the different possibilities that the Zohar lays out for why there is this inequity between the rich and the poor. However, the Zohar is very consistent with the earlier literature in telling you that no matter what you think about why you're rich or poor or somebody else is, you have no right to desist from helping the person who needs assistance. So you're called upon to feed the poor, to house the homeless, to take care of the orphans and the widows. In fact, the prophets say this is why we lost our temples, because we went off course and we weren't doing these things. So everybody is called upon to give charity. Remember we talked about food. There was this idea that on your table there always needs to be a portion for the poor. And obviously if you're not in a place where the poor are coming directly to your table, you're going to set aside some money for charity. And so the Zohar is like all the other previous literature. It says you must give charity, you must do good works, you must share what you have, you must be mindful of the need for this kind of assistance. And there was different kinds of assistance over historical time. When Jews were captured and held for ransom, the rabbis always raised money to redeem the captives. That was a very popular form of charity for a long time, unfortunately. So you're always supposed to engage in these activities. And then the Talmud added another piece to this, which said that if you do give charity and you perform good works, then the Shekhinah, the divine presence, will rest on you. So you're getting the reward of the energy every time that you engage in these activities. So nobody is exempt. I remember once being at Mount Madonna, and Baba Haridas, their guru, was asked the same question. Well, if it's somebody's karma to be poor, why do I have to take care of them? And he was very clear and very direct that it is not up to us to judge what somebody else's fate may or may not be. That their present state, even if it was an expression of that fate, that we don't have the option of desisting from doing the right thing, the charitable thing, because of the fact that we think that that person somehow came into that situation through fate. So that's kind of the outline. Those are some of the steps. And the step didn't include dropping the lozenge. And I wanted to move it to a couple of other things. First of all, if you look at your handout, which I think many of you got it, you'll see a prayer that I just translated that is often in very old prayer books. And sometimes there's a prayer like this in Sephardic prayer books. And what it is an opportunity every morning, if you do it every morning or whenever, to ask for help with parnasah, with livelihood. Now, one of the reasons I chose this prayer is that it's not as grounded in the concept of sin as some of the other prayers. For example, the prayers that I have in my Sephardic prayer books start off with the supposition that part of why we are not getting what we need is because we have sinned, or we are off. So the one I do in the morning starts off where you first ask God for forgiveness for any place you've been off your whole life, from the time you were born, and through your whole life, and towards anybody, etc., etc. And then it goes on to ask for parnasah, for livelihood, through a special name of God that is specifically assigned to this notion of sustenance. Now this one, that was in an old Ashkenazi prayer book, is put together from different pieces of the Psalms, etc. I'm going to read the Hebrew eventually to you, and you'll do the English. Or maybe I'll have Jeff read the Hebrew, then I can save my voice. And so it's, again, if we go back to the beginning of our thoughts, it's all grounded in this idea that God controls everything, has everything, supports everyone. So this is a classic kind of Hebrew prayer for sustenance. And if you do the whole routine, what you read before this is the portion of the mana. Interestingly enough, all of this comes from the Torah portion that is my bat mitzvah portion, my birth portion. So if you were a very traditional person, you would first read the section of the mana from Parshat B'Shalach, which is Exodus 21. And so you're reminded always that there was a state of being in the universe in which God took care of everyone and everything. And I don't know why, but they say that you're supposed to do it on Tuesday. I have no idea exactly why, but I follow, some things I follow, it's not too many things. So, Jeff, would you be willing to read the Hebrew?
Yeah. You want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah, so they get to hear the sound.
Ana ha'el, ha'mechin parnasa lechol bria, u'mazmin malbush lechol nivra, v'sholeach lahem michya, ten li et michyati, u'techal kaleni, u'tefarnaseni oti, v'et kol anshe beiti, v'et kol Yisrael, parnasat tova, benachat v'lo b'tza'ar, b'hatar v'lo b'isur, parnasa she'ein ba shum busha uchlima, parnasa shelo tatzicheni ba lidei matnas basavar dam, ki im liyadcha hamleah, v'harchava parnasa she'ucha la'asok b'toratcha ha'kedosha, v'hatahora v'hatamima, v'lekayim et mitvoteha b'li tirda v'eshev b'shalom al shulchani, v'chavod im kol b'nei veiti, v'lo yehi alai shum ol basar v'adam, ki im ol malchutecha la'avdecha b'levav shalem, v'eska lahachnis orchim v'ligmol chesed et kol adam v'lasot tzedakah l'horium la v'lo ekashel bivnei adam she'enam hagunim. Amen.
Let's read it together in English. Please, Divine One, who prepares support for every creature, creates clothing for human beings, and oversees livelihood for all. Answer me and grant sufficient income, not only for myself and all members of my family, but for everyone on the planet. A good way of working, calm and not troublesome, lawful and not prohibited, an income in which there is neither shame nor humiliation, a vocation that does not make me dependent on charity, but only on the full and ample outpouring of divine grace, an earning that will enable me to engage in spiritual practice so I can look forward to living in peace and honor. May I not suffer from my ties to others, but truly be able to celebrate my connection to you. May I be blessed to practice hospitality, to act with loving kindness towards all people, to perform acts of charity for those in need. May it all be without distractions. Amen. So again, the person isn't asking just for stuff. They're saying, in effect, that if they have enough, they will be in a better position to help others, to study, to teach, to do the spiritual practice. They're not asking it strictly for themselves. So they're taking the model, in a way, of the Rebbe and the Tzaddik. Because in the Hasidic era, what the Tzaddik did, what the saint did, was to feed hundreds of people, sometimes as much as twice a day, not just holidays and Sabbath. And they got contributions from the wealthy to be able to feed the poor. And probably they used the little elbow on the wealthy by suggesting that if you gave charity, this might help your next incarnation or help you in the world to come. So there was a kind of way in which the religious authority functioned as an intermediary around these issues. And I think part of what has happened historically is that religious groups have become the intermediary, as nonprofits have too, in terms of people giving charity and taking care of each other. So My mother took care of her parents, but nowadays very few people are taking care of their parents directly. Sometimes they're able to, but more often than not, the parent ends up in some form of assisted living. And so the children are giving in the form of time, energy, money, but not necessarily direct care. Just as in my family, uncles and aunts and grandparents took care of children, now that too is a little bit less the case. So Judaism with the tithing, Christianity also, all the spiritual groups function as intermediaries. When the mother comes to San Ramon and they sell all the tchotchkes, the money is going to the hospital and the orphanages and the schools. So it's sort of like we're no longer dealing as much with the homeless person. And part of that, I think, is because we're living in economic enclaves where we don't, I mean, if you go to South America or India, the rich and the poor are like living right next door to each other. So it's harder to ignore the person who is in need, or maybe you put up a barrier, you put up a gate, and you make a gated community so you won't be bothered. It's very rare that you still see the direct articulation of it. And so I wanted to tell you about my cousin Benji's wife, Chaya Bracha, who is a Rabbanit in Jerusalem. They're very Orthodox. They have 12 children. And the karma in my family is very interesting. This is a cousin and his sisters who were brought up in the same coal mining town near where I grew up, with no Jewish education, very few Jewish friends, no Jewish schools, etc., until they were teenagers. And all of them have become super Orthodox. The least number of children in that family is like 7 or 8. And so one of my cousin Brent is 9, Benj, and his wife have 12. So when one of their daughters got married, and I happened to be in Israel, I was at the wedding, and it's, women and men separately seated. There are bands. There's a band for the women and a band for the men. But what was fascinating to me was it was in a kind of a still rundown neighborhood. And there were these old women beggars coming in, like there would have been on the old East Side. And I watched my cousin by marriage, who's a wonderful spiritual teacher. She's a great light. Each one of these older people who came in, usually with a bag, they are really bag ladies. They're putting the money and sometimes they have a shaker and they say this is for a school or this is for an orphanage, and you never know, it doesn't matter. And as each one came in, she would go over to greet them, she would invite them to sit down to dinner, and she would usually get them to dance. And I watched this process and I was just in awe of her, because I realized that our setting doesn't provide that as much. And we are probably not so well equipped. So in a way, the religious philosophy, the nonprofit, whether it's the food bank or AIDS or whatever, is the intermediary now for us to do this work. And we don't have as much of the hands-on. So perhaps that's why we need to reassure ourselves philosophically of what we're doing and how we're doing it. I have a couple more interesting prayers, that some of which came as techinas for women, but this one's is similar to the one we read, but she says, cause your blessed Shekhinah to cast rays of light on me and my family, so that we will all be able to see the path most favored by you, God, for us to follow. For you are the one who gives strength to the weak and bread to the poor. And so I look to your hand. In this respect, the Jewish prayer is very much like the Lakshmi hand, that it's the right hand of God. I look to you to provide the daily needs of my family. I ask you to bless our work and the work of all those with whom we are associated. And then she asks that no adversity ever come to her home, and that her children never have to taste the bitterness of hunger, thirst, cold, disease, and pestilence. And then she goes on to say that she is not asking for riches for her own sake. She says, my heart is poured out for the sake of sustenance for my home and my family, We do not look forward to gain wealth, which in reality brings on poverty to the soul. We merely wish to engage ourselves in calling to be your messengers so that we have enough to be able to do this. This is a women's prayer that was published in 1930. It was written in Yiddish, not clear how old it is. So whether we start with the Talmud, the Zohar, go through the Hasidic period, the women's prayers, they all carry this common thread of the appeal and the petition. And I'd say where the Zohar is different is perhaps in having more like what we would call a modern or a new age kind of view, that it's up to us to so organize the nature of our prayers that it can go from the very opening, the bottom, from that lower hay, up the spine, up the digestive system, across the shoulders, up and out through the crown of the head, and that we, again, as that human being that is the model of the Adam Kadmon, the original being, that we have that capacity. I think in the Zohar you don't hear as much of that kind of poor me, I'm poor and downtrodden, and I wait for God to put bread in my mouth. I think what you have in the Zohar is the sense that everyone can be empowered. Perhaps what it doesn't spell out, and maybe that's the word that's left for us, is the specifics of how we would do that. So I want to pause here for questions and comments, because also I know that many of you have techniques that you use that enable you to do exactly that, to take the prayer up. All of us who pray for other people seem to have a similar experience, which is that we seem to be able to do better for other people than for ourselves. That seems to be a very common practice. And we don't know, is it because when we work on ourselves that our personality and our desires get in the way? Or, and that somehow when we're praying for somebody else, we get to that level of purity, tahara, where the heart opens in compassion for somebody else. And we get past our own ego, our own personality, our own pettiness, competition, whatever, you name it. We know what our issues are. So that's always been a fascinating issue for me. Any intuitive that you speak to will tell you that they trust what they channel for somebody else much more than what they get for themselves. It's much harder to work on yourself. And I suspect that that would be true for doctors and health practitioners too. That'd be easier to operate on somebody else, right? And to see that, you're doing a great job, right?
Or symptoms.
Or symptoms. But when you're working on yourself, whole other story.
Denials, strong.
Well, so this is a good place for us to put some issues out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a meditation, with music of course, on another issue, because part of where I want to take this next is into the question of how did we come to value those things that we value as being wealth, specifically gold, silver, brass, exotic fabrics, spices, but jewels, special jewels. So part of what I wanted to also explore with you is there something inherent in humans that values that which is rare, and so we count it as precious. And I wanted to also share with you a little bit of how the Torah gives us a template for that. Because in the building of the tabernacle, the building of the Mishkan in the desert, it's very clear. God says, bring me gold, silver, brass, crimson, blue, purple, etc. And we have the case of Moses creating his serpentine rod from the brass. We have the golden calf. We have the Mishkan, which is inlaid and lined with gold. It raises for me all the questions of alchemy. If you think about the Middle Ages, that was the big issue of, how you could convert, other metals, base metals to gold. But I've been fascinated by this question of how do we come to this kind of consensus about what represents wealth and luxury and beauty. Because and then we will meditate on some of those questions. So, good time for comments.
Well, I have a comment on this first prayer that you started with. In the paragraph where it says, an earning that will enable me to engage in spiritual practice so I can look forward to living in peace and honor. And to me, this implies that this is what comes first. That our spiritual practice, our prayers, our connectedness with divine comes first before, our livelihood or before.
Right.
And that how much we have gone away from that. And that it is, people working 24/7 and families working constantly and having very little time left over for time together, no less spiritual practice. And so that really comes